Welcome, geeks, to another exciting episode of Rockin The Code World with dotNetDave. I'm David McCarter. I'm glad you're all here. I hope you've had a good week. It's been a tough. Well, see, I'm getting my thoughts out of whack. I've been. Some of you might know I've been looking for a job lately, and I have to tell you, I think that looking for a software engineering job these days, especially when you've been in the career as long as I have, it's pretty tough, And I was sitting on my couch this morning, going, I do a show every week, and so does Samantha Bee on TBS. She does a comedy news show, and I wish I could get paid the same amount of money she does, or at least pay my bills from doing just one show a week, and then I can just do that and have fun with you guys, every Saturday morning. So anyway, I'm glad you're all here. I'm super excited about. See if I if I bring my presentation up, that might help. I'm super excited to have Jeremy Likness on again. He was on in 2020. I think he was show number 5 or 6. And to date, don't tell Jeremy because it might inflate his ego. He's had the most popular show on Rockin The Code World. So I'm really glad to have him back on. It took a couple going back and forth to get him on. And so he's here today. And so I'm super excited. So let's get to it. I want to mention the Ukraine again. Unfortunately, it's been well over 100 days now. This poor country has been dealing with Putin terrorist, and so just I know there's a lot going on in the world right now, is in America too, and but just think about our friends, especially our software engineer friends in Ukraine, and think about them. And it's any way you can support them, please do, because I have personal motives, because I want this war over, because I want to go back to the Ukraine, because I was there in 2015 and I loved it there, and I really want to go back and speak again, and of course, visit the country. It's a very beautiful country, and so get the war over. All right. Hey, have you guys watched the latest season of Stranger Things? Well, guess what? They were showing this computer screen on Stranger Things on not HBO, Netflix. And look, .NET. The funny thing is, that Stranger Things takes place in 1984, 1986. And so that's 15 years before .NET was even released. So maybe this is a prediction. And, I was looking at this graphic this morning. I was going, you know what? I'm not sure if the 3.5-inch discs were even invented then either. And so, Stranger Things needs to do a little bit more fact checking about historical programming stuff. But who cares? It's a show. I have a brand new article out on CSharpCorner this week called Speeding Up Logging in .NET 6. You all know I'm really into code performance. And so this is the fastest way, most performant way I've been able to find to log your events and exceptions and things like that. And so I'm using .NET 6 and using .NET 6 source generators. And so I hope you'll check out the article. And this gives you another reason to go to your boss and say, we need to move to .NET 6 right now. Because just moving to .NET 6, you'll get big improvement gains just by doing nothing except for moving to .NET 6. So if you're not on .NET 6, I hope you're working on it right now, because 7's about to come out. So you're already behind. So anyway, I hope you check out the article. Oh, Jeremy already. So hopefully I'm not going to screw up his intro. So Jeremy Likness is a technologist with over 3 decades of professional experience in software development. He's worked in verticals ranging from manufacturing, healthcare, finance, energy, and on product teams as a consultant, filled roles from developer to architect and IT director, and helped launch several startups. When he's not in front of a computer, I always like to know what people do when they're not coding. Jeremy hikes, takes pictures of galaxies and nebulas. He does hundreds of burpees every week to show both to both slow the progression of Parkinson's degree. I'm sorry, I'm going to start over again. When he's not in front of a computer, Jeremy hikes, takes pictures of galaxies and nebulas, and he does hundreds of burpees every week to both slow the progression of Parkinson's disease and the awareness. And I'd love to know what a burpee is. So welcome, Jeremy.
All right. It's exciting to be on the show. I love the intro. I think that's the biggest motivation to come on. Obviously, users and connecting and everything's great, but what a fun intro.
Oh, thanks. And I didn't read all of it. So everybody wants to read all of your bio, they can go to the dotNetTips.com. So what's a burpee? Am I pronouncing it right?
You're pronouncing it right. A burpee is one of those exercises that you feel like whoever invented it was really angry and wanted to hurt a lot of people by coming up with it. But you start in a standing position, you crouch down on the ground, you kick your legs out so you're in a plank and do a push-up. Then you kick your legs back up, squat, and jump back in the air. So you start standing, down, push up, squat, jump, push up, squat, jump, push up. So it's a full body exercise, and you can do 2 or 3 of those in a row and start to see stars, literally. There you go.
Oh, Simon's on it today.
Yeah, I was going to say.
So how many do you do in a row?
So my challenge for this year was to do 1 burpee for whatever the day of the year is. So today is the 161st day of the year. So I've got 161 of these to do today.
Good luck.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been, so this is the 23rd week and I haven't missed a burpee yet, but yeah, they're getting tough. It's a lot of burpees to do.
Well, I'll check in on you on December 31st and see how you're doing.
Yeah, that's what everyone says. Let's see how that last day goes.
Well, I hope you meet your challenge. You should do like a GoFundMe or something if you meet your challenge at the end of the year.
Yeah,
raise money.
I've got a video channel that's in your show links. I pretty much document it every week so that people can see the progress and that I'm still in the game. And that links out to a fundraiser I do for the Michael J. Fox Foundation. So.
Oh, cool. Yeah, you work with him?
Yeah, they've got a great support network for Parkinson's disease. So.
Yeah, I was just watching Back to the Future last weekend and watching him. He's so young, you know.
Oh my gosh, that show is it dates us, right? It's something we came out and saw when it was fresh and new, and now it's what, 30 years old?
Yeah. And I was thinking, when are they going to reboot that? You know?
Yeah, right. Everything's a reboot these days.
I know. Do that, you know, and have Michael on as the wacky professor, maybe. So what does that do to help your Parkinson's disease?
So the disease is a progressive disease. It gets worse with time, and basically your cells that produce dopamine are dying out. So you lack the production, and that's kind of how cells talk to each other. So you get these short circuits. Like this tremor is because my brain's just having trouble telling my arm how to behave. And so the only thing scientifically proven to slow the progression is regular intense exercise.
Wow.
And so I found myself at the end of last year not being as consistent as I'd like to be. So I said, you know what? I usually am really well motivated with challenges, especially public challenges where I'm very vocal about what my goal is. So let me set this burpee challenge. And it's been effective. It got me back into a rhythm. And for the most part, my symptoms have been really well under control as a result of that regular exercise too.
Well, that's great. I'm glad you're doing everything you can, you know, to keep yourself healthy, because we need you at Microsoft, and we need your knowledge, your 30 years of you know, experience, and so I'm glad you're doing that. It kind of you know, I know a lot of software engineers, including this one, is really bad at exercising. I'm awful at it. I'd rather do pretty much anything else in the world than exercise. And so I made a challenge to myself, and I'm going to do it tomorrow before I donate blood. And so I'm going to get back into bike riding. The cool thing about where I live here in Del Mar is the road right here next to my house. Also is the beginning of this Highway 56 here in San Diego. And the cool thing is when they built the highway right around the time I moved here, 23 plus years ago, 25 years ago, dang. The cool thing is that they built a paved, segmented, fenced-off bike path almost the entire way of the highway, and that's where I go because California drivers are idiots, and I don't want to be on the road with California drivers and a bicycle. And so the cool thing is it's only about 2 blocks from my house. So I only have like 2 blocks I have to go on the road, and then I'm on the safe paved road and do my exercise there. And it's hilly too. And so you get some challenges like going up, especially the biggest hill on the bike path. So all you software engineers out there, exercise is important, and I'm reminding myself of that. So
it is, and you pointed out one of the best ways to get into it is to find something you love, right? So if you like bike riding, this VR set behind me, there's actually different games that are pretty strenuous games in VR. And that was one of the ways I kept motivated last year. Like there's some boxing games and some Beat Saber action that can get your heart rate up. So it's just something that keeps you moving and you have fun doing.
Yeah. And I'd also like to say real quick to everybody watching is, Jeremy's screen is a bit blurry. I guess Northern Redmond doesn't have good internet connection. And so, sorry, but the important part is hearing what he says, and his knowledge of programming engineering. So I hope you'll stick around. It's going to be a great show. I love not only these shows, but I really enjoyed interviewing you back in 2020. So
great. Yeah, that was I'm competing with myself now with the announcement you made earlier.
That's right.
So stressful.
We're going to have to get you over your top, right?
Yes.
So we'll see. I'll check back in a couple of weeks and see how the numbers are going. Because most of the people don't watch the show live; they watch it later on because it's nighttime in a lot of other countries right now. So
sure.
So anyway, everybody here, make sure you ask questions. Some of the things that Jeremy told me he'd like to talk about is Efcor 6 and 7. Why naming is hard? Yeah. .NET Interactive, GraphQL, Blazor, WASM, Microsoft Adaptive Accessories, and Astrophotography. So if you have any interest in those subjects, please tweet your questions, and we'll get Jeremy to answer them. But now that we've talked about exercising, which is a good thing for all us software engineers to do, what would you like to talk about first?
Let's talk about Efcor. That's the team I work with quite a bit.
Okay.
So are you using Efcor in your projects?
I am not right now, especially since I'm out of work. But
right, yeah,
most unfortunately, I love NAD framework. I was using it before. I was using it when it was in beta. And I even wrote my first major API for a company called Mitchell International here, using NAD framework and the other frameworks. I'm probably going to screw up the names, but they had dynamic websites and something similar for APIs that I used to actually create the API. Because I don't know if you remember that, but when NAD framework came out, it had this really cool framework that I really liked. That you basically say, here's a model, and just make an endpoint out of all the ways to get to this data, and you were done. You didn't have to write methods. You didn't have to write anything. It was all automagic for you. And, it's creating a complicated API like this one was. I can tell you that framework, like I said, I'm forgetting its name, really helped me get that project out on time and meet not only our needs, but meet our partner needs, right? And so anyway, I've been using it for forever, but yeah, I haven't been able to use it lately, unfortunately.
Yeah, so we've been working on EF7, and that's where I say naming is hard, right? Because we have EF6, which is the legacy Efcor product that came out years and years ago. And if that's not confusing enough for people, there's two versions of EF6, one that runs on .NET Framework, one that runs on .NET Core. Actually, I guess the same version runs on each. But then we have Entity Framework Core, which is our modern version. And now that we're at 7 and we've put 6 behind us and we're just moving forward on fresh versions, we're trying to simplify it, right? And just EF7's easier to point to. But we've got what's exciting for me about this release is that every release sort of has some themes around it, right? So as we're planning, we say kind of what is the main goal for this release, and we'll have a bunch of major items and some smaller items. And EF6 was really, I think, the two main themes you saw were us making sure that there were features for people coming forward from EF6 to Entity Framework Core 6. So if you were on the legacy version coming on the new version, we didn't want to leave you behind with features. And we also built some Cosmos DB functionality into it. With 7, we've been really focused on some of the most requested user issues that have been raised. And that's support for JSON columns. So that's being able to actually not just map a field that's a JSON column, but to be able to query the fields that are inside that JSON column using those database features.
Right.
And then there's updates to this concept of bulk update of having a set of batched updates without having to query for items. So let's say I need to delete a range of items. Let me be able to do that without having to query them in first. And then I'm trying to think. I've got our roadmap pulled up, my cheat sheet here.
Yeah, I've been seeing some tweets about EF7, and I don't specifically remember what they were, but they, whatever somebody was tweeting about the new features, I thought were really cool.
Yeah, so that's been exciting. So that's been the bulk of my time. Our team was traditionally the Efcor team. We're now the .NET Data team because we're starting to take on tasks that are just focused on the .NET Data experience in general. So we've been looking at very seriously GraphQL and some of the things we can do around that experience. We're actually doing some work on distributed transactions. That's something that didn't come forward with Efcor because of the reliance on some Windows. I'm sorry, not with Efcor, with .NET Core, because of the reliance on some Windows-specific APIs. But there's a huge demand to, maybe I'm running on Windows, but I want to use .NET Core and I want to use distributed transactions. So can you get that support for us?
Cool. John asked, can we deploy Efcor to the Raspberry Pi?
I believe so, because you've got the .NET version. Basically, anywhere .NET goes, Efcor can go. And so you could deploy a SQLite, local database, and use Efcor on top of that. So that experience is one that's available.
Oh, and John, your book is in the mail. I finally got your book and swag in the mail because unfortunately, when I shipped everything out in the beginning, I shipped it media mail, which is the cheapest way to go, which cost me about $11 for like 4 packages. Unfortunately, the stupid post office opened all my packages and saw there was a sticker in it, because I put a .NET Tip sticker in the book, right, to give to people. And they sent them all back to me going, no, we're not going to ship it media. And so I had to fork out $40 for the same thing.
All because of some stickers.
Just because of a sticker and DeJoy. So, John, it's coming to you. It's coming ground, but it should be there this coming week. And John also asked, do you have a Efcor cheat sheet to share?
Yeah, cheat sheet would be interesting. There's so much that you can do with it. I would call our docs the cheat sheet, right?
Yeah.
So AKAMS/EFDocs takes you right to it, or docs.microsoft.com/EF. But our getting started is pretty straightforward, kind of gives you the short and long of reference something, build a DB context, and access your data. So it's pretty straightforward set of steps for that. Of course, when you get into the nuanced edge cases, the complicated larger apps, then a cheat sheet no longer makes sense, right?
Yeah. And my cheat sheet is every time I say that, I think a bad word's going to come out of my mouth. Mine is actually Julie Lerman. Don't tell her.
Yes.
When I can't figure something out with any framework, I call Julie and go, Julie, how the heck do you do this?
All right. Between her articles, her courses, videos, yeah, phenomenal information there.
Yeah, ever since her first book, I called Julie the queen of NAD framework, and so she's my go-to of anything NAD framework, pretty much.
Sounds great. Yeah, we're very happy that she works closely with the team too. So as we're coming out with new releases, we collaborate, get the information out, and she does just an awesome job of amplifying and sharing and making it consumable for people.
Yeah, Julie is a great person, and I'm glad she's in our world right now. She's a really great resource. Yes, John. No, John, it was shipped from where I live here in Del Mar, California. And can you share her courses? John, all of her courses are up on Pluralsight, so you can go check it out there. And I recommend watching every single one, probably a couple times. All of her courses are great, including her domain driven design course with Steve Ardalis. Is awesome. So check that out. So what else with any framework?
So one of the things I mentioned was GraphQL, and I'm always interested to see who's using it, who's interested in it. And just for those people listening, that's one of my projects at Microsoft, is understanding that experience. So definitely reach out to me if you're working on a GraphQL project. I'd love to chat. But it's pretty exciting because of the way Entity Framework Core can take something generic like an iQueryable, an expression tree, and translate that to several backend providers, whether it's Cosmos DB, MySQL, SQL, SQLite, etc. It makes it ideal for a handoff between a GraphQL and that backend interface. So there's a few projects that are open source projects. There's GraphQL.net and there's Hot Chocolate. And those projects have adapters that make it very straightforward to connect your front end basically to Efcor as the data access API to the backend. And so I've been doing a lot of just understanding what that experience looks like, what the 80% case is always the easy one, right? Just let me expose this. You start getting business logic into it. You start fanning out to different types of sources. That's where you've got to have a good experience and a good set of documentation to guide people through that. But for those not familiar with GraphQL, I should probly spend
I was going to ask you to say that
10 seconds. So GraphQL is sort of self-described as a backend API for the front end. And the idea is Facebook developed this to have a single API handle all of Facebook. And if you think about sort of the traditional development cycle, if I'm using a REST API and I expose a method that fetches contacts, well, that's great. But let's say I just want a few fields from contacts and a few fields from another related entity, then I have to make sure the REST endpoint can handle that. And either I'm iterating on that REST endpoint and providing another interface and another parameter, or I'm going with something like OData, which is designed for projections and queries. Graph lets the client specify exactly what they need as deep as they want it. So in other words, I can say I want a course that has a student, that has a address, that has, and I can just request the pieces I want. And then it's in a syntax that looks like JSON. It's not exactly JSON, but it's very descriptive. And I can demo it in a second if we're interested. But basically, you take that request and then you have what's called resolvers that look at the request and say, how do I satisfy this result? So the really easy case is if everything's in the database, then I'm just mapping that request to a database query. But a more complicated case, well, not necessarily complicated, but realistic might be I have an image associated with something, and maybe the image isn't in the database. It's on a web server, which makes sense for an image. So what I can do with that resolver is I can say everything comes from the database except for this one property. And this property, this file property, I'm going to go out to the website and grab it. I can even go out to another REST endpoint and ask for information from that REST endpoint. So it's a
Right.
really popular technology for people looking to modernize legacy backends because they can put this front end in front of their existing APIs. So that's kind of GraphQL in a nutshell, and it has a convention for making updates, and it has some advanced things like there's something called a subscription, where when you post a query, you can say, notify me if the results of the query change. So you get a
Yeah.
sort of real-time feed, which
Right.
is nice. And then there's also something called defer, which says I can get back the query in pieces. So give me this
Hmm.
structure, but if there's a part of it that takes longer, just put a placeholder in it and then send a trigger when the rest of the data is available and I can render it. So you can imagine how
Ah.
all of these things are useful for a performant front end, basically.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's been fun looking at that experience. We're working to get some tooling built into Visual Studio to make it easier to work with GraphQL. I know the existing projects have kind of their own set of tools, like Hot Chocolate has something called Banana Pop Cake. These names are so much fun, right? And Banana Pop Cake is a browser IDE for working with GraphQL. So you can define it, you can look at your schema, you can test queries and results and do that. So that's GraphQL for you, basically a front end for backends. It's not meant to replace something like gRPC. It's not
Yeah.
meant for microservices to talk to each other. It's meant for a front end to be able to change what it needs without someone in the middle tier having to go back and rewrite that endpoint all the time.
Right. And it makes it easier to, the way I understood it, is that it makes it easier to bring together different data stores into one, right?
Correct.
Right. And that's the thing that really appealed to me when I learned about it, was going, okay, yeah, that's great. And not only to me, that's not only great for, legacy apps. I think it's for any app. I mean, going in the future, because in this day and age, and I was going to say that, data in our world has changed a hell of a lot in the last 30 years, right? Because
Sure.
back when you and I started, right, there's not a lot of choices, right? There's SQL Server, there's Oracle, they're all pretty much relational database stores, and there wasn't much more, right? And now we have so many different data stores and so many different transport mechanisms and things like that, GraphQL to me seems like it will make things a lot easier to work with.
Yeah, it has a very interesting feature called stitching too, that is basically being able to take multiple GraphQL endpoints and coalesce them into a single. And the example I use is you could have a third-party service that gives you weather
Mhm.
and another service that gives you restaurant info. And
Yeah,
you could combine those and say, give me the restaurants with outdoor seating where the weather's good, for example. And that can be an API request that API doesn't expose the details of whatever backend it's talking to. So very, very flexible technology and something
I,
that, oh, good.
oh, and all that data comes back at one call, right?
It can. It depends
Yeah,
on how you want to do it, but it does. And you can even request multiple queries. So you can batch and
yeah,
say, I need 3 different queries to run, bring them back in a single payload so that I don't
right,
have to round trip multiple times.
right. And that's, so I'd like to say to all the, probably more the younger developers out there, is that, I talk a lot about this in my books and in my conference sessions, is that, one of the things as a developer we need to do, especially when you're working on the UI layer, is don't go across the internet or the network unless you have to, right? Because that's the biggest killer, the performance issue of apps, is going across the internet. And I've got a longer story about that proves that fact. But that's something you have to be cognizant of if you're worried about the user experience, is that don't transport anything unless you have to, and try to do as much as you can at one time. And that's even back in the early days of any of the framework, it had batching in it. And I not only did I use it in that API, but I forced our partners to use it, because I didn't want them taxing our servers. I didn't, instead of doing 50 calls back and forth, I wanted them to do one, right? And so I basically had to handhold these developers and say, this is how you do it in any framework, batch them up. And if you don't batch them up, I'm not going to approve your application, right? Because back then, this was 14, 15 years ago, servers were a lot slower, and transport was a lot slower. And so we had to be really cognizant of that. So anyway. John, I'm looking at John's question. How does it work for the instance the data changes after the call? Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, so that's basically an application concern that you basically have a subscription on the client that says, I want to listen to when this data is updated. And then the server is responsible for when there's a change to publish that change. And I'm trying to see if I've got something here that I can show really quickly.
Okay.
We'll see how with the connection the way it is.
Yeah, this goes slow on the screen.
All right.
So it has a chance to catch up.
Let me share.
I think John is pretty much the only person who watches the show live. Do we have anybody else? Oh, we do have one. We have one other person today. John's always here every week. Oh, you use light background. Thank you.
Of course. Yeah, I'm actually just on my GitHub repo. It's the easiest way to show this code snippet. But this is what's called a mutation. So this is how I define an update. And what's coming in is a telescope. So I've got a sample application that manages gallery pictures, and part of the data associated with it is which telescope. Yes, and I will share the repo. That is right here. It's star repo. GitHub.com, Jeremy Likness, star repo is the one that I'm in. And in this example, I'm basically coming through adding the scope or modifying the scope, and Entity Framework makes this really easy because we have something called a change tracker that's going to automatically just look at your payload, compare it to the database, and understand what the differences are. And then right here, I've injected this service that's a topic sender, and I just send a message that says the telescope was modified. And whatever parts of my application that can mutate that item can send this message, and any clients listening for it will receive an instant update and be able to refresh that information on the client side.
Wow. That's pretty cool. No, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, no, that's it. So that's an example. I wanted to show one other thing while I'm in the repo, and that's what a query looks like. So this is the code I had to write to stand up an endpoint to query. Basically, Entity Framework already understands how to do like skip, take, anything with link you might want. So in GraphQL, you can have similar things where you're saying, I want to filter by this field. So just by using attributes, these are provided by Hot Chocolate, saying projection, filtering, sorting, it takes this iQueryable that Efcor deals with, applies all those changes, Efcor automatically translates it to the database dialect, and then you get back exactly what you want. And what's nice about this is if you're asking for 2 fields is what you get from the database. You don't get 15 fields and then send 2 fields back. So it's streamlined from the back end all the way to the front end.
Yeah, and that's another important part of using something like this, or even using something like OData or Rust even, is that one of the things I've always loved about Rust since it was introduced was that, Rust was pretty much the first time, and OData was pretty much the first time that we could easily query the backend and only request the things that we want, because the other performance killer going across the wire is the payload size, right? And so, and at this company, when I wrote this API, we had tables that had hundreds of rows in it. So I was only interested in a couple fields. I didn't want all the rest of them, right? And so, so yeah, that's another important thing for performance. And before I forget, one of the things I've always loved, if those of you who haven't used any framework yet, one of the things I've always loved about any framework is that, from one framework, basically, you can basically use it against all kinds of different data stores, right? And now even GraphQL. And especially when you have a smaller team, and most of us write apps these days, and we have to write them short amount of time. Having developers having to either learn or remember all the different ways of get to different data stores, you can just do it through any framework. It's all right there. And you use the same link syntax that we've been used to forever, right? And it's just one place you can do pretty much all the calls you want to do.
Yeah, and what's nice, in my opinion, about the framework too, is we always build what we call an escape hatch. And there's this misconception that it's either or. Either I'm using Entity Framework Core or I'm going
Right.
direct with some other thing. And that's just not the case. We expose the underlying database. So
Yeah.
let's say you're dealing with an application and you have one query that you can't express in link in a way that is performant enough. It doesn't mean you have to toss Entity Framework out. You can
Right.
write a stored procedure or write the raw SQL for the query, and then we provide that escape hatch to get to the underlying connection and run that and map that in. So it basically gives you the flexibility of both worlds. And we've done just a ton of performance focused work so that there's always going to be overhead compiling that link query into SQL, but for
Right.
the SQL generated, we are very, very performant compared to the alternatives. And in most cases, the overhead is negligible compared to the benefit you get from having an easier API to use and, strongly type checking of your queries and everything else that comes with that.
Right. And you also cache those query plans, or they're not actually query. You cache those queries, and or you can pre-compile those queries, can't you?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. Right. To make, if you were really worried about that little bit of performance loss in translating this stuff, you can pre-do it when you basically compile the app, and then you have very, very little performance loss, right? And
yeah, that's exactly right. In fact, we even take the conceptual model we build that maps your domain to the database. And there's a fluent configuration you can use because the way you build your business objects may not directly correlate to the way you define tables and relationships in the database. So we give you a fluent API to make that translation. And even that can be built compile time now. We have a feature called compiled models that builds that, so it's not parsing it, so that in apps that are running, for example, on Azure Functions that need a really quick startup time, we can eliminate even that overhead of resolving the model up front, which only makes sense if you have thousands and thousands of tables and relationships. But we have customers who do, and we optimize for those cases.
Wow. That's cool stuff. Now it just reminded me of, right now to learn Maui, I'm rewriting an app that I've had out for developers for a while. It's actually not live anymore, but I wrote it years ago when I had a broken leg, and I used that Cosmos DB. And at the time, I was asking, I don't know, Julie or whoever, and I go, does any framework support Cosmos DB? And back then, when I first wrote it, no. And I was going, dang it. So anyway, the new version I'm writing will all be Entity Framework. So
nice.
Yeah.
Well, you're on a good version of it because we added support a few versions ago, but that support required a lot of configuration because we were essentially taking something that was traditionally relational and forcing it on something that's non-relational, that's document based. And so one of the things we did with Efcor 6 was we focused on fundamentally changing our assumptions when you're connecting to Cosmos DB, so it makes it much easier to configure and work with, and handles a lot more of those cases. And we've seen use grow quite a bit. So I'm assuming people are happy with the new functionality. But again, that's something that I'd love for someone watching this who uses Cosmos DB, whether it's positive feedback or constructive criticism, definitely reach out to us because we want to hear from you and improve that.
I will.
Awesome.
If I run into anything. So the question I just thought of was, So have you gotten a request from a customer that for a data store that you guys just haven't been able to implement yet for either difficulty reasons or it's just too hard kind of reasons or something like that?
Implementing what we call a provider.
Yeah.
Provider's a plugin for a database is complicated, but
Yeah.
most of the requests we get. So it's interesting. We ran a survey and we had several thousand developers respond. So it was a pretty good sample size. And we asked, what provider is the one you're most interested in that doesn't exist? And the number one answer was MongoDB. The number two answer was CSV or Excel.
Oh, yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
And those are both realistic. So the answer is we understand it, but in the same token, there was a lot of demand for Cosmos DB, and we needed to understand usage and what is like curiosity versus business requirement.
Right.
And so one of the follow-up things that's on my plate as a product manager is to talk to customers who are using MongoDB and understand the advantages they would gain, because it's at the end of the day about prioritization.
Right.
And if we have 100,000 people asking for like JSON column support and 10,000 people asking for MongoDB, and ideally we'd have unlimited resources and would tackle it all. But we do regularly go out and ask about it. And, there are community providers as well. So, for example, MySQL is maintained by the community. That's not a provider we maintain, but that team works very closely with us. So, I would say if there's a provider that hasn't been prioritized for us to build on our roadmap that someone's interested in, reach out to us. And if it's a project someone's willing to take on, we'll provide support in the sense of knowledge, information, helping, through that building out that provider, because we love to see those community projects succeed the way like MySQL has, for example.
And you guys aren't tied to the .NET releases, right?
We are actually.
Oh, you are.
We're not part of the release. We're a separate product, but our release cadence comes out. So when a .NET preview comes out, our preview comes out. When .NET releases, so when .NET 7 releases, that's when EF7 will release. So we are tied to that, and it makes the support similar as well. So like this is a short-term release. 7 is 8
7
will be,
is
yeah. So that's the cadence for that. I wanted to add to that for people interested in Efcor, we have a SQLite provider. Actually, someone on our team maintains the driver for SQLite, and we have a provider for that. And that's a lightweight database that's easy to install even on mobile apps. And so that's something for client type solutions that need a nice lightweight local database. It's a great solution. And as of a few releases ago, you can actually run Efcor and SQLite in the browser with a Blazor app, which is pretty exciting. It's not something I would recommend having a million row database. Yeah, right. But for a local data cache and being able to do some querying and sorting and things like that using the database mechanism in a Blazor app, that's a fun experience.
I just had a crazy idea that I'll say and see if you guys either are working on it or maybe you think it's crazy too. But, I was talking a couple weeks ago, or I was tweeting about, some of the things that frameworks that Microsoft has abandoned that I wasn't really happy with, and because they were really solving a need. And so one of those frameworks, most people have never heard about it, was called the Microsoft Sync framework.
Yes.
And that was an easy way for us to basically all your data reads and writes would go to your local data store. And then as soon as the data store can actually get it to the back end, then it will do it. And so this allowed you to do less things across the wire. It allowed you to cache more things locally, right? Which most people don't do because there's not a lot of frameworks out there that allow you to do that. So I guess my question is, have you plans to do anything kind of similar to that, using any framework?
There are not concrete plans right now, but as far as the problem, the teams aware of it, and it's something that we may take on in the capacity of the .NET data team. It may not be a part of Efcor, whatever it is would obviously have to work pretty well with it. But there is a framework out there called Memsync. I believe it's MIMSYNC. Let me look it up really quick, make sure I'm stating that right. Not Memsync. It's not Identity Manager. I'll look it up. We did a show on it. But basically, it's an open source project. The person who maintains it happens to work at Microsoft, but it's not a Microsoft project. But it is a replacement for the sync framework. And we had them .mem.sync. There it is.
.mem. Can you look that up, Simon, and post the link to it?
.mem.sync. So that's something people should look into, because last time we spoke with the maintainer, it had some pretty solid functionality around what people are looking for in that area.
Okay. Yeah, because I talk about this in conferences and I stress people to use it, but I don't think most people do, because there's just not an easy way to do that.
Right.
In .NET world, at least. Yeah.
Sure.
So before we're running out of time, so do you want to talk a little bit about your astrophotography?
Sure. I'd love to.
That sounds fascinating, actually.
Yeah, astrophotography is one of those hobbies that I've always been fascinated with astronomy. And it was this random thing at the start of COVID, shortly after my diagnosis with PD. An ad just popped up about what's called an observation station. And this is like a modern telescope. It's not like any telescope you and I are used to. It's basically a device that connects to your phone. You tell it to turn on. It literally mechanically raises an arm, takes a picture of the sky. From that picture, figures out how it's oriented, and it's ready to point to any celestial object and take pictures for you. So
wow.
it's pretty amazing. And so you can say, point to this nebula, point to this star, and I'll actually share something here in a second. But I started out with that and wanted to be able to do more, like have a stronger magnification, have clearer images. And so I started piecing together my own telescope, and I found out that astrophotography is a lot like programming. There's workflows that go into it, because you have to gather light for hours at a time. And what that means is you have to have equipment capable of compensating for the Earth's rotation so it stays on target.
Right.
You get these really long exposures, and you have to have algorithms that understand how to take 1,500 photographs, match them up and combine them and blend it so that you can have signal over the noise that you get from camera readouts and whatnot. And so in the end, it becomes just a really engaging process. But here, let me share my screen. I'll show you some of the...
And for those of you out here who love photography, because I do photography also, and I've attempted to take pictures of like the moon and things like that, and it always comes washed out. So this is not easy to do, and so it probably takes a lot of work to get the exposures right and everything too, right?
Yeah, so I'm showing you first, these are pictures that I just took with a regular mirrorless DSLR camera. Now this one has what we'll call chromatic aberration. You see the blue and purple on the side. Yeah. And I purposely left that in because I didn't want to over process the image. But you can see like this Milky Way shot. This was awesome. My daughter lives in Colorado and took me out to a remote site where I was able to capture this.
Wow.
But then you attach a camera to a regular telescope, and I'll show you my Celestron Edge, which is a huge telescope, and then you can start getting things like this galaxy.
Wow, you took that yourself?
Yes.
Wow. That looks like you see something from NASA.
Close-ups of the moon.
Whoa.
Yeah,
I didn't know we could get that close without using the Hubble telescope or anything.
Yeah, well, what's blows my mind is all of these images were just taken from my deck or my backyard here in Monroe. So I'm within sight of downtown. I've got a permanent glow. In fact, what surprises people when I tell them about it is there's actually a street lamp right next to my deck that I have to shoot past. So I have to use filters and take really
Yeah.
long exposures. But this is one of my favorites. It's called the Running Man Nebula because it's kind of like a person silhouetted
Hmm.
with their arm out running, and then you've got like this space dust that to envision the fact that this bit of dust is more massive than the solar system by multiple factors is just mind-blowing.
For those of you who think we're the only ones in this universe, yeah, it seems like a lot of waste of space if we are, right? Can you share that link to your photos?
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I'd love to go, after the show go look at them. My brother, I was always interested in this because I grew up, during the beginning of the, space stuff here in America, and so I've always been interested. My brother was really more into actually looking at the stars and stuff, and he, when we were kids, he had a telescope and everything. I'm not sure if he does anything with that now, but yeah, it's fascinating. To me, I think it makes you feel like, yeah, there's a lot out there. It's not just us, right? And a lot of beautiful things. I know a lot of some of the pictures you get from NASA are kind of like an artist rendering, but these are really cool, and you didn't render anything. So how big is, so when you just take photos with your camera, how big is your lens, and what is the f-stop?
Okay, so I usually shoot f-stop 5 to 10, but the lens length, just for example, so I have multiple scopes. My camera lens is 200 millimeters when I'm shooting shots with my camera. The Stellina, which is that observation station I talked about, this one has a 400 millimeter lens on it.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we talk about the Celestron, which is it's a special design. So it has mirrors within it so that the light stretches longer before it
Right.
reaches the eyepiece. And that length is anywhere from 2 to 5 meters. So 5,000 millimeters. And that's what's needed to get like some of these extreme close-up shots of the moon, for example, where you're really zooming in on a crater or a piece of the terrain. And depending on it, because you have things called reducers that will reduce and widen your field of view, shorten the focal length, and you have things called Barlow lenses that extend the focal length. And depending on that, there's different ways you have to shoot because your f-stop might be a lot slower, so you need to
Right.
expose a lot longer,
Right.
etc. But usually it's the f7 to f10 range that I'm shooting in.
Wow. That's and for those of you out here who don't do photography, these lenses that Jeremy's talking about are super expensive, and because I have a brand, I bought my first mirrorless camera last year, and I'm having to change my lenses over to the large format, and that is even more cost, right? And so I have to get rid of all my old lenses. I have to buy all new FX format lenses, and I could tell you, those lenses, just even the one I used to do photography for concerts and stuff, cost more than the damn camera did. So, because I buy glass lenses, I don't buy plastic lenses for cameras, and they're heavy.
Yeah, I found some of the lenses actually cost more than some telescopes in some cases.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah,
but what's been really fun about this, I know we're getting close to time, but
yeah,
I'll
yeah.
just share. I've got a repository, so I've gotten to use my development skills to basically. So I built out my own blog, but I have this AstroAdapt tool, which is really fun because you have to have a certain distance of your sensor from the telescope to get proper
Hmm.
focus.
Right,
And you've got some play in the focus style, but as you modify it, that changes. And so you have all these adapters that can fit in different ways, and it's actually millions of permutations. And so I wrote a piece of software that lets you upload your adapters and specify their dimensions, and then it solves based on what that distance is, what the right pieces of the puzzle to put together are. So it'll come out and say, connect this piece and this piece and this piece, and you'll be at your focus distance. So that's something that I'm writing as a Blazor app that I hope to release soon.
oh, that's cool. I know what I'm going to be doing when I retire now. So I gotta let you go because Simon is he's probably already, no, he hasn't bugged me yet, but yeah, we're out of time. So Jeremy, I'm so glad you were back on the show today, and I'm glad that you've shared your knowledge of Entity Framework and Astrophotography and burpees, and so thank you so much for being on the show. I won't ask you what you do for fun because we just talked about it.
We did.
But is there anything else you want to plug before I let you go?
No, that's it. The burpee link is on the show. And if people appreciate the effort that I've been putting into making sure I do one more burpee every week, I encourage you. There's a link in the show to donate to Parkinson's disease. Of course, I've got a very personal motivation for that, but there are estimated 6 to 8 million people impacted by that. And research helps us find something that'll at least slow it down.
Yeah.
And, I'm not expecting necessarily a cure in the next few years, but something that can slow the progression would be phenomenal.
Well, I'm going to donate. And I encourage all of my viewers to donate too. Because, this is a terrible disease. And yeah, we do need to find a solution for it, I think. Well, I don't think I know. It's, yeah, it's, so anyway, thank you so much. And you're welcome to always come back on the show. You can hang out afterwards if you want to chat or just go about your day. But thank you for spending part of your Saturday with us. And I learned a lot during this. I hope everybody watching has learned a lot. And I can't wait to have you back on again.
Sounds great. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, me too. Thanks, Jeremy. Wow, that was a lot of fun, everybody. I'm already thinking about when I can get Jeremy back on to talk about some more stuff. So let me know how you like it. I know a lot of you aren't watching live, so please send me an email or tweet. Let me know how you like that episode, and I'll get them back on as soon as I can. So as with every week, everybody wins a copy of CodeRush from DevExpress. CodeRush is the only refactoring tool I've ever used in Visual Studio. I use it every day that I'm coding. Not only does it help me be a productive coder, but it also helps me to learn. And they just released a new version. No, that was their other stuff. But they have a newer version out now. So every new version comes with new things that teaches me how to do things a little bit better in my code. And so I hope you check it out. It's a free, real copy. It's not stripped down or anything. So check it out. Let me know how you like it. I want to do something different to end the show, and I'm sorry we're going a little bit long today, but I hope you'll check this out. The highlight of my week this week was yesterday morning when Mahesh, who runs CSharpCorner, invited me on his Growth and Mindset show to talk about a few things. And one of the things that we talked about was silos at companies and also developers being too defensive about their coding. And so this video is on my end, and so I hope it'll play okay, because doing videos up with StreamYard is not very easy. And so if it doesn't work out, I will definitely post it and or have Simon show it next week. So let's give it a try.
All these silos that people put up, and to me silos are just brick walls, right? And you're not going to let anybody in that silo, and therefore you're not going to share or participate with other teams in your company, right? And I think you said something about this too, that we consider the code that we produce our babies, right? And we become very protective over that, right? And I have to be honest, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and I have to be honest that, in my younger days of software engineering, I can say I was probably more protective over my code, but I've learned, through experience that I shouldn't be, right? Because when you become protective of your code, that means you're not going to listen to anybody's input, right?
Yes.
And therefore, you're not going to grow, the application isn't going to grow, and therefore you might just lose customers, right? And so,
yes,
one thing I think a lot of people have to get over is that, right? And it's not your baby. It belongs to the company, right? And you should share that knowledge with and experience with everybody you can, so they can also learn, right?
And even same thing applies to sometimes even I was like that too in the beginning days. CSharpCorner, somebody will give a better idea, like, no, I'm right. This should be how it should be. But I agree that if you want to grow and build it for other people, and the growth, you have to be open-minded. You have to be listen to all the ideas. You don't have to accept those ideas.
No.
You don't have to, at least, but you got to listen and see if that makes sense or not.
And when people give me feedback, that's exactly what I do. I take the feedback. I don't let it offend me. And I go, okay, well, they told me this, and this is what I'm doing. How should I incorporate their comments, into my code, right?
Yep.
Because most people that are telling you something are trying to improve it.
They're really trying to help you. Really, they're not really picking on you. We should not take that personally.
And I also know that some developers, aren't very good at communicating that, right? And sometimes that might come off as they're being, mean, or I think the vast majority of developers out there, at least the ones I know, aren't trying to be mean. They're trying to help you, right?
So that was a little snippet from yesterday from the Growth and Mindset show. And I'd like to add to that is, if someone does give you something that, if someone tells you something that could be improved in your code, not only listen to them and try to incorporate that, but if you don't understand what they're saying, or maybe you don't like what they're saying, don't go running to their boss, because that's just going to create animosity in the team. So don't do that either, right? We're all in this community together to build great software, and we all have to work together, right? And there's no place in software for silos and overly defensive programmers. It's just going to hurt the company and the software. That's my advice for this week. So, sorry, you weren't supposed to do that. All right. So don't forget to help the kids in India. That you can go to this GoFundMe page I have for them, or you can go to voiceofslum.org yourself and buy things. They need not only school supplies, not only do they need funding, but they also need school supplies for the kids and clothing and things like that. So no matter what way you help them, I hope you will go help them, because I've been raising money for the orphanage NGO since 2019, and I will be going back there in October. And so I can't wait to see what, the differences are and how the kids are doing when I go back there in October. So I'm really looking forward to that trip. All right. Well, thanks for watching. We're going to be off for a couple weeks because I was supposed to be going to Australia next week, or the week after, but that unfortunately was canceled due to funding issues by the NDC conference. And so, oh well, hopefully next year. So check back in 2 weeks and we'll have a great show for you lined up. I already know who it is, but I'm not going to tell you. Please be safe and listen to your medical professionals out there about COVID-19. I can tell you from a personal story that my hairdresser got COVID, got over it, went and got my haircut last Friday, and literally 2 days after I left, she got it again. And she got it because of some medication she's taken, allows it to rebound. So luckily I didn't catch it when I was getting my haircut, but unfortunately, she just got out of quarantine today. I checked on her this morning. And so we're not over this. So be careful, listen to your medical professionals, and do what I'm going to do tomorrow. And that is donate blood, because we need blood. There's a huge shortage of blood, and you can donate blood. It helps 3 people for 1 donation. And it only takes a little bit of time, and it makes you feel better about helping your fellow human in this world. So with that, please email any suggestions to Rockin The Code World at CSharpCorner.com, and I will see you in 2 weeks.